Welcome, Dr. Margaret, to the True to Yourself podcast. It's so wonderful to have you.
I can truly say that I'm more than delighted to be here. Thank you so very much, Ananta.
Oh, thank you so much. I really enjoyed reading your book, Perfectly Hidden Depression. It was an extremely illuminating book, even though I feel like I have been on this healing journey for a long time now myself. I still found so much valuable content in it and so much insight. And I can't wait to introduce our readers to it and help them to find a way to ease into the healing journey through it. But before we dive into the book, I would actually love to hear about a time in your life when you were true to yourself, as the podcast title proudly talks about, and how that impacted you.
When you sent me the questions a little bit early, and I thought about that one, and immediately what came to mind. My husband and I have been married for 33 years, but he was not my first husband. He was my third, actually. I had two marriages in my 20s, both of them very chaotic and very destructive and not good. And when we moved here, this is a small southern town. We moved from Dallas, and I said, I'm just not going to tell anybody. I mean, I carried still a lot of shame about that. And I said, I won't lie, but I'm not sure I will offer it, as information. And at the time, Maya Angelou came to my awareness as she was poet laureate at Bill Clinton's um, inauguration. And I went to the bookstore and looked through her books and found a little book of essays called "Wouldn't Take Nothing for My Journey Now." And in that book of essays, she told a story about herself that she had been elected or somehow had been given the honor of being like New York City's person of the week or person of the month. There's a big high honor. And she went out to celebrate with a bunch of her friends, and she got absolutely snockered. She got really, really drunk. And she said she saddled up to this table of men and sat down and very sloppily questioned them about why no man would love her and how she had struggled and what was so wrong with her. And her friends had to sort of drag her off and say, Maya, let's go home. And she said it was one of those moments that you wish you could change your name and move to Canada. I thought about that, Ananta, and I thought, here she is, poet laureate, esteemed author, writer, very wise woman,
Mhm.
and she's putting this very embarrassing moment in a book. And I put it down and I thought, I'm not going to hide. I don't want to hide. I have lived the life I've lived. I've made mistakes. I want to be more transparent than that. And I was. And I have tried to increase my ability to do that from thenceforward, because I was reared in a family where you just didn't air your dirty laundry and you just didn't talk about anything that was, not nice. And so it was something that really changed me and this was in my late 30s, early 40s. So that's the moment that came to mind when I made that decision, thanks to Maya Angelou, that I would share as much as I could that I thought would be helpful to my clients. And then to my friends, it was like, okay, it's me. Here I am.
Wow, what a powerful story. That's incredible that you were able to connect with that and that she had that experience. I do remember reading that in your book and being really struck by that. Like, wow, I mean, she could have totally not shared that with the world through writing, but the fact that she did, I feel, gives us all permission to have less than perfect experiences that we can actually own.
Exactly. And why it's that particular moment, I don't know why, but that's the one that came to mind.
It's really powerful. Thank you for sharing
Yeah.
about that. So, what exactly is perfectly hidden depression?
Well, the term itself is something that I pulled out of the air, as I was writing a blog post, my normal weekly blog post one day, and I was thinking about these people that had come into my office. I'm a psychologist for those for your listeners, and I'd been in practice for quite a while when I moved to well, I've been in practice for 7 or 8 years when I wrote this, so not quite too long. But I was thinking about the people who would walk in my office and deny vehemently that they were depressed, that they would say, "Oh, I'm not really sure why I'm here, but, I'm a little anxious, or there's some relationship issues, or I've got some anxiety, or I can't sleep, or whatever." But what I noticed about all of them, Ananta, was that they could not access painful emotion. And
Mm,
even if they were talking about something that would be incredibly painful for most of us to talk about, they would smile or they would discount it. They would say, "Oh, it happened a long time ago. It's really kind of silly for me to even bring it up, but you asked," something like that.
mhm,
And when I wrote this post, I called it "The Perfectly Hidden Depressed Person, Are You One?" And it went viral and all this kind of thing. And that led to the book eventually 5 years later. But what it is when there are several kinds of perfectionism, but the one I'm talking about is a destructive kind of perfectionism. When that is the camouflage that emerges as someone's survival strategy in their family, as a child, whatever, even as an adult, and that they continue living life like that, to
mhm,
where it actually begins to hide or repress or suppress actual painful traumatic memories or things that you put away because either it's not safe enough in your family or your culture to talk about it, it's not okay to talk about. I mean, there you get abused for it, you get
mhm,
chastised for it, whatever it is, and so you have this storage of hidden, deep, painful memories, which you really maybe you may not even be aware that they're stowed as entrenchly away as they are, but you are something's wrong because you are
mhm,
constantly needing to be busy, you're constantly needing to be on, you
mhm,
constantly need to feel in control. And it's what I call perfectly hidden depression, because it is not going to be like your typical depression. It's not going to look like that. It's not going to sound like that. And it's an incredibly important thing for us to talk about because certainly in the recent years, perfectionism is way on the rise,
wow.
uh, really amongst many cultures internationally.
Mhm,
So, as is suicide. So,
mm.
and there's a correlation. So I mean, it's kind of a complicated question, but that's probably the most succinct answer I can give at this point. Hope that's helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of the signs, what would you say are the telltale signs of perfectly hidden depression?
The signs of it. That's I it is a it what a lot of people who have identified with perfectly hidden depression. It's not a diagnosis, by the way. I
Mhm.
call it a syndrome, which is
Okay.
a group of behaviors or beliefs that are typically found together. Codependence is probably the most well-known syndrome around here. And it is a mixture of these traits and beliefs that demand a lot of perfectionism. You're highly perfectionistic. You
Mhm,
carry, but that perfectionism, instead of being fueled by curiosity or generosity or whatever, it's really more fueled by shame. I've got to prove myself as a person. I've got to make, I'm afraid people will find out that I make mistakes, so I've got to do things perfectly. You take
mhm,
a lot of responsibility. In fact, you're uber responsible.
mhm,
You discount hurt and any kind of pain from the present or the past. You're very helpful and loving toward other people, but you don't let anybody really know you.
mhm,
I mean, there are about 10 basic traits.
mhm,
you exude a lot of gratitude, and you talk about being very grateful, but at the same time, it has a toxicity to it, meaning that you don't even, I mean, you must be grateful for things rather than seeing that even things that are blessings have underbellies that can be difficult.
Mhm.
Um, and it's just a general, you're often very successful. Um, and you're well liked, you're well known in the community, you give, you love, you care, you work hard, but at the same time, at the core of that, you're very lonely and very despairing
Mhm.
in your very quiet, silent moments. And unfortunately, that despair can reach um, can reach um, can reach dangerous levels where suicide is an option.
Wow. Wow. You said a lot of really important things that I want to
Mhm.
talk to you about. It actually brought up three things in particular, so I'll just go one at a time.
Of
But
course.
how do you know when someone is pursuing excellence versus perfectionism?
Great question. There's absolutely nothing wrong with pursuing excellence. Absolutely nothing wrong. I mean, in fact, it's something that we really admire in people. The old saying, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing well. And but here's an analogy I've used in my teaching clinicians about this. Let's say you plan a hike for your family
Mhm.
and you really want to go see these waterfalls. And that's the purpose of the hike. And you've packed well and you've really packed a perfect hike and perfect picnic. But little things happen along the way. And, somebody gets poison ivy and somebody gets hungry before they're supposed to get hungry. But it's gorgeous and you enjoy it and it's fulfilling and you still really enjoy the being togetherness of it, but you don't get to the waterfall. And
Mhm.
so you turn around and you come back and you think, you know, that was perfect. That was exactly what it was supposed to be. That is what's termed a constructive perfectionist, that you try to do things in a very excellent way. But you also recognize that sometimes you can't control everything, right?
Right.
Whereas destructive perfectionism is the same hiker of the same family where the trip is getting to the waterfall. It's accomplishment oriented. It's not
Mm.
process oriented. Constructive perfectionism is process oriented. What am I learning from this process? Destructive perfectionism is I've got to reach the accomplishment or I will fail.
Okay.
And that is because again, at the root of destructive perfectionism is this sense of typically this shame and fear
Mhm.
of I have to prove that wrong. You've got voices in your head all the time that are saying, if you don't make it to that waterfall, if you don't, if you don't get the promotion, if you're not head of a nonprofit and if you don't make more money for them than they've ever made, if
Mhm.
you don't write a book that's somehow sells a certain number of copies, then you have failed. And so your fear is that you won't achieve versus the fear if in constructive perfectionism is that you won't enjoy. And so it's like it's the motivation is different. The motivation is different.
Very interesting. It actually sounds a lot like the spiritual principle of karma yoga, where
Mm,
it's about training your mind to really focus on the process and
mhm.
let go of the attachment to the outcome of what you,
Exactly.
and that
It
tends to
it
make
it's
better
it's
work.
not that the outcome isn't important, but
Yeah.
you can accept that there are things that are just not in your control, that it again, and that makes a lot of sense that you um it's not that you don't try, you do try, but it's also about what you learn along the way. and a destructive perfectionist will not, they will not believe that.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really important distinction because it is important to aim for the best, and to put effort into a goal because sometimes if we're outcome oriented and say we don't get the outcome, there could be a defeatist mentality that, oh, then I just won't even try again. Whereas on the spiritual path, Lord Krishna has said in the Bhagavad Gita that no effort on this path ever goes to waste. And I
Oh,
like I like how you said about what did you learn from the experience? Because if you can learn something from every experience, then you are able to keep going and build that resilience to be able to apply that and to be able to still go with that same intention. Like maybe you try again to go to the same hike to see the
yes.
waterfall, but you remember how much you enjoyed it last time and what you learned. And so you can kind of integrate the two and just enjoy the process again and also remember what may help you to get to the actual
Yeah.
waterfall this
Don't take all your children, probably. You really want to get to the waterfall.
time. Yeah, totally, totally. So I love that. And I also wanted to ask you, how do you know if the kind of gratitude that you are feeling is toxic or if it's the kind of gratitude that all the kind of research talks about uplifting your mood and helping you cope better and see more positivity where maybe you've only seen negativity before?
I mean, I think the cognitive behavioral therapist would say, or the positive, activity therapist, psychologist would also say, it's a positive reframe. You're grateful because, you make sure you're framing things positively and you're grateful for those positive things rather than thinking, well, this is a drag or whatever. And I agree with that so much. Toxic positivity means that you cannot allow yourself to say, this is hard.
Mm.
This is harder than I thought. This is, well, just be grateful you've got the opportunity, or let's say you're grateful because you've always wanted a big family and you have a big family.
Mhm.
Well, if you've got 4 children, also got 4 lunches to fix, 4 homeworks to help with, 4 weddings, whatever, I mean, that's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so sometimes you go, wow, why didn't we stop with 3? You know? And that's okay. You still want to you're grateful for number 4, but number 4 makes it a little more complicated. Um And so it's being able to um, sort of swim in both sides of the blessings and then some of the struggles that those blessings bring in your life. I mean, I loved writing a book. I loved having a book published. It
Mhm.
was one of the hardest things I ever did. I mean, my husband said, how many times did you go to the doctor that year that you wrote the book?" I mean, it was multiple, because it was hard. It was hard physically for me. So, I was grateful for that experience, but it also inherently, caused some issues in my life that were much harder to deal with. So you can be both. You can be grateful and you can recognize that things, um, sometimes are hard. And it's those people that just will not allow that. They'll say, they will shame you for not being grateful if you
Mhm.
talk about something as being, having a hard day, or, well, just count your blessings, and
Mhm.
especially in the Bible Belt here in the South,
Mhm.
that's very true. So for a lot of people.
Wow. Yeah, I feel like that's something that is good to be aware of. Is the gratitude connected with shame? Is it a punishing sort of perspective to block feeling our real feelings or acknowledging the paradox, right, of life that the
Exactly.
biggest blessings can also bring the biggest challenges?
Exactly. exactly, and sometimes those challenges, my dad, every time he would get ill again, and he was glad to be alive, and we loved him, and he had a great attitude. But one day he said, God's not supposed to give you more than you can bear, but I've got to talk to God. He's way overestimating my abilities. So, he was kind of saying, I'm grateful and this is great, but whoa, when are you going to stop?
Yeah. Wow, that's funny. Um, wow, yeah, that's really helpful to be able to see these traits because it sounds like you're describing a well-adjusted person who would be happy with life's blessings and is grateful for them and always helpful to other people. But you talked about the presence of this deep loneliness within
Yes.
such people who seem to be well adjusted and are even well liked and are involved in the community. They have families, they have friends, they have lots of people around them. But
No
what is
one
causing?
really knows them. No one really knows what's going on with them. Right.
Yeah, yeah. So can you talk a little bit about that? What's causing that deep loneliness in the midst of being around other people? And how do you identify that if someone is actually really as happy as they seem, or if they may be suffering inside?
It's an interesting thing. When I was trying to get the book published, or my agent and I were, some large publishing houses were very interested in it. And I got all excited and thought, whoa, this is going to be great. And then when it got to the committee, they said, we don't think these people will buy a book on depression. They
Oh,
need to look perfect. Why would they buy a book on depression? And
uh-huh.
that's not a bad point. These people are very invested in looking a certain way.
Hmm.
And until something clicks in them, in fact, I've heard some people reach out to me and say, I heard that term, perfectly hidden depression, and I knew you knew what was going on with me.
Wow.
Um, and it is a very difficult undoing or untangling or letting go slowly to recognize that you can talk about that loneliness, that despair,
Hmm.
and that's not going to cause you to become this person you fear becoming.
Hmm.
You are also an and you are your competence and you are your vulnerabilities.
Hmm.
And that self-acceptance is so important. These people do not have that kind of self-acceptance. The only thing they accept about themselves are their accomplishments. And that's what they're willing to, but they know, their gut knows, their unconscious knows that they're hiding and that there is a basic loneliness. I cannot tell you, sadly, tragically, how many spouses have reached out to me and said, my husband killed himself, and it was a shock to the community, or my wife did, and I didn't even know how bad it was. I
Wow.
had no clue. Um, Now that I look back on it, I can see maybe that one woman, for example, told me that her husband had made some sort of financial decision years ago that had been really bad.
Hmm.
And he had had to work extremely diligently to bring the company back up. He practically lost the company. And
Wow.
she said about a year before he died by suicide, that something was going wrong with his business.
Hmm.
And she believed then that something was triggered in him, that he was about to go through the same experience, and he, quote unquote, couldn't live through it again.
Hmm.
And although that was her best theory about why he took his life, because the shouldering the burden of thinking I'm about to fail, or I may look like I'm failing, was so onerous to him that he couldn't, as much as he loved her and his family, that he couldn't tolerate the idea of going through that. He didn't know how. Um, that's her best theory. And so what I'm trying to do with this book, um, and knowing wonderful people like you and having them ask me questions about it, is realizing that and helping people realize that there is a way out of that, that you are still living your life by codes and laws and rules that you learned years and years and years ago that don't have to apply it. And yet, and you're drawn to that idea, but you're so afraid of what might happen if you question or confront or begin to massage those rules a little bit,
Mhm.
because it is because, again, I love to tell the story of a guy named Steve, or at least that's what I'm calling him. And Steve was a very successful person here locally in Northwest Arkansas, and head of a very difficult business, and retired. And he and his wife actually came in at first because she was having some struggles with him with retirement, and then we got into more some of her stuff, but he kind of sat and listened. He participated some. But about 4 months later, he called me back and he says, "Can I come back by myself?" And I said, "Sure." And he said, "I want to talk to you about some things that have happened to me." And I said, "Well, tell me about your childhood." And he started laughing, Ananta, just laughing uproariously. He said, "Well, my mother used to throw rocks at me and scream at me that I'd never amount to anything." And I proved her wrong. And he said, "But I don't know. I still am. I was looking forward to retirement and I don't understand what's happening to me. I'm drinking too much. I don't want to do anything. I've had this great career. Um, and what's going on? I don't understand." And I looked at him and I said, "Don't you have a grandson?" He go, "Yeah." So let's get him out in the front yard. Let's go pick up some big stones and throw them at him and say, 'You're not going to amount to anything.'" Scream at him. And Steve looked at me and went, "Well, I would never do that." I said, "Why not?" "Because it would hurt him." And I said, "You are still that little boy that was screamed at. As long as you were working and getting this constant affirmation, what a
Mhm.
success you were, you could answer your mother. You could say, 'See, you're wrong. I did amount to something.' And now with retirement, you don't have that armor anymore. And your armor is beginning to come off. And so you don't know what to do with yourself." And he kind of looked at me. I won't say he got tears in his eyes, but you could tell that something was going on. He says, "I think you're right." And he began to do that work of, wow, I have been bound for years to prove my mother wrong. Now, how do I how do I find and discover my true value? It was an incredible session.
Wow. Wow. That's so powerful. Yeah, we internalize so many of these things that happen in childhood and don't even realize the power that they continue to have on us. And as I was reading through your book myself, I remember coming across reflection number 35. I love how you have all these reflection prompts in the book to help the readers go within and see their own patterns and things that had happened in childhood or things they learned in
It's the hardest thing about the book.
it's the hardest thing, but it's the most powerful part of it because we can
Yeah.
actually have a way to go make that journey within that so many of us are avoiding initially because of how much can come up. I remember when I was reading Reflection 35, though, and you were talking in there about how we need to look at any spoken or unspoken rules that
Yes.
existed in our childhood and how they may have affected us. And I loved that story that you told about the cooking of the ham because that was hilarious, where the woman was cutting off a part of the ham because she said her mother did it. And she asked her mother, "Why did you do it?" And she said, "Well, because my mother did it." And so then she asks her mother,
Yes.
she would cut off that part of the ham. And she was like, Oh, because the container wasn't big enough, so I just needed to cut part of it off. And it was such a hilarious story, like, oh, like, there's actually a reason for it that totally doesn't apply to your context, but you're just doing it blindly because that's what you have seen modeled for you.
Right,
And
that's
the
what that
basic
was the rule was when you cook a ham, you cut the end off.
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of like an unspoken thing, right? That just
Exactly.
got passed down, and it made me really think about how in the spiritual tradition of Vedanta, we learn about how to develop the intellect, which is different from intelligence. It's the part of
Okay.
the mind that can actually reason, that can think, that can judge, that can decide, and that can also hold the mind and the emotions and be able to process it and to not be at the mercy of our emotions. And it's a powerful thing to have, right, on the healing
Yes.
journey because our emotions do tend to get the better of us. And the way that we're taught in Vedanta to develop the intellect is actually to not take anything for granted and to question everything, which is
Mm,
why I love that you have all these questions in the book because I feel like so much of our progress in healing is actually about asking powerful questions.
mhm,
And I asked myself about that, like, "Oh, are there any rules that I'm still kind of going through?" And it reminded me of chapter 3 in my book where I've talked about igniting the fire of transformation and the first time that I really looked at the denial of what all went on in my childhood and the masks
mhm,
that I wore as a result of it and my own eating disorders and now I would say my own perfectly hidden depression that
mhm,
caused all of this and how it was so much around, like, childhood and eating, which made sense then that I had eating disorders because I used to get punished if I didn't eat everything that was on my plate, and there were certain foods that really didn't agree with me that I found out much later that Ayurveda validated are actually not good for my particular constitution, like eggplant. And I
mhm.
remember, boy, every time eggplant was on the menu, I was just like wanna die, rather than go through having to eat it because it just did not agree with me, and I would experience it being forced down my throat, and I had to
Oh,
eat it because
goodness.
it was the rule. It wasn't even like children in India or Africa are starving, so therefore you should eat it. It was just, it's the rule, and you don't question it. And it made me have a really difficult relationship with food and emotions as I grew up, and I was able to confront that and talk to my dad, and I've shared about that story in my book, which is a really powerful
I
experience.
remember that story. Mhm.
Yeah, to be able to finally, take off those masks and have a much more authentic relationship with myself. And it led to a lot of healing and transformation with my dad. And I'm so grateful for that. And it was so unexpected, that he would, initially it was not pretty, but soon
Mm-mm.
afterwards it came around. I think it was just that the mask was on so tight for everyone. And the idea of anyone taking it off was like, no way. Like, no, that did not happen. Like, no, like you got the one who got it all wrong. But then, my mom kind of stayed in that place for a while, but then my dad quickly like saw through his own stuff, and was able to work with me and we really transformed a lot and things have continued to improve and improve beyond even my imagination. But it was very scary to do that. And I realized even recently that I had a lot of skin issues because I went through a traumatic experience with some spiritual teachers who were not, the real deal. They were like wolves in sheep's clothing,
Mhm,
and they
mhm.
were, very manipulative and had done a lot of abuse. And I was just caught in that because I was such a keen student to want to learn these deep traditions, and it's important to
Sure.
learn straight from the source,
So
if
they
we
manipulated that. Mhm,
yeah, yeah, exactly. It happens so much, right? And I feel like I experienced a lot of skin breakouts afterwards because of all the toxicity, that was involved in that dynamic for so
mhm.
many years. And then the stress of moving and changing my what I was going to do and just figuring out a path out of all of that and being able to start basically my life all over again because all the people I was spending time with I no longer did. I moved across the country. So there's a lot of anxiety provoking big life
Yeah.
changes that happened within that year. And I had a breakup also of a significant relationship and so many breakups of friendships even because of that.
Mhm.
So I feel like a lot of my emotions that were probably hidden again in that particular context came out through my skin to make themselves visible. And I felt like by that point, I had healed enough to be able to recognize that this is something to embrace the fact that my emotions are coming out through my body and they're there to teach me something and they're there to actually help me know when I've really processed all of the trauma
Mhm.
and all of the lessons that are meant to be learned so that I can carry forward only the pure teachings and the good truth and wisdom that I received and let go of all the rest of it and really, put it behind me. And that was really the origin of my book, The Way of the Goddess, and being that vulnerable because I realized not facing all the patterns in my childhood caused me to learn from people who repeated them for me to be able to kind of
I see.
close that cycle, and then my skin was my teacher to know where I was at in that process. And as I was reading your book about that rule thing, I
Mm.
realized, oh, wow. So I've done a lot, and why is it still not going away? And then I made these small, small changes, right? Like really micro changes where I'm like, let me just pay a little more attention to when I'm actually full and not just eat because I don't want to have to deal with the hassle of having leftovers, right? Or eating the mind dulling leftovers because I know the psychology of food, right? And if you eat food that's leftover, it's going to cause more lethargy in the mind and more of a, kind of dulling influence. Then I'm like, okay, but that's also maybe a story. Maybe the real culprit here is that I'm still following the rule at this really small, hidden micro level where it's not a big thing. I'm not an overeater. I don't do those kind of binge eating patterns anymore. But I realized I let the risk of leftovers allow me to make sure I finish everything in the plate.
Exactly.
Like, where did that finishing everything in the plate come from? Oh, it was the rule. Oh my gosh. I gotta totally give myself full permission to just take whatever excess food I don't eat, not guilt myself for it, and just put it in the compost and know that it's going back to nature and it's okay. But whatever I'm eating that I don't need, that is beyond my body saying that's enough, just beyond it, it's still causing some disruption in my skin because the skin is the organ of digestion. And I'm like, whoa. And that was it. And then now those breakouts don't come back anymore. And I'm like,
Very interesting.
wow, that rule thing was a big revelation.
Wow. That's really incredible. Yeah, Bessel van der Kolk would be jumping up and down right now with the body keeps the score. So he'd go, "Oh yeah, that's what it does. All right."
I really want to read that book. It's on my list of
Oh, it's a
books to
wonderful
check
book.
out. But it was very illuminating. So I really have to thank you for that because I thought, gosh, I've come such a long way. I've even written this into a book and I'm going to share more about it with people. But oh, okay, no, somewhere still there was some subconscious stuff going on, so I needed to clear that out completely, and I think there's something so powerful about the reflection questions and just asking the right questions, because maybe I wouldn't have asked myself that question about what rules am I still subscribed to.
I have to thank my cognitive behavioral friends for that because that's pretty straight out cognitive behavioral therapy, which some of which I do. I don't do it as rigidly as a lot of people do it, but yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. And then you begin to see just how intricate, as you did, these rules can go and how they can seep into one level and then another level and another level. So it's yeah, it's quite interesting. So Yeah, I'm glad. I shared with you there was a review on Amazon that said, "Yeah, I really loved the first of this book, but then those reflections began, and kind of was like a therapy session." And I thought, well, that's not a negative review in my book. So luckily, there are other people who said, yeah, the reflections are, thought provoking and take some time, but they're really worth doing. So,
Totally. And that was actually another question I had for you.
mhm.
Often we hear that the healing journey is not a straight line path, it's more of a spiral. And also, I would love to know about what do you tell people as far as the timing of it goes?
That's one of the things when I interviewed you for your book that I told you that I liked so much about your book that you said, okay, you start and you go from this goddess to this goddess, and then you start over again and you go from this goddess again to this goddess, and then you go back. And I thought that is such my experience as a person and as a therapist, that is so true, that we don't necessarily get quote unquote finished. Um, and so, some of the people wrote me and told me I couldn't do the first reflection because it was a mantra, and I got stuck that it had to be the perfect mantra.
Oh, geez.
And I even put that in the book. If you get stuck with this being the perfect mantra, then just take a word, or but it has to be the perfect word. And so, you can get stuck anywhere. That's part of the working of the book. And as far as the time is concerned, I just another mistake that perfectionists especially will make is that they think, oh, these exercises are easy. I want to go to the harder ones. And I had a woman tell me that, and she jumped to the trauma timeline.
Oh, geez.
And she said, "Oh my gosh, it was terrible. I couldn't do it." And I looked at her as kindly as I could and said, "Well, of course you couldn't, because you hadn't, it was like being on a ladder and having to jump up 3 stories to get on the rung you were supposed to be on, and suppose, or you might be ready for." So the exercises are designed to try to help you slowly jostle or juggle or challenge or massage. I've used that word before, or begin to see things. I mean, even from one of the first things I say is, if no one knows you, you're not going to sit a friend down and say, well, okay, I need to tell you, I'm reading this book called Perfectly Hidden Depression, and I've been suicidal, and I've done all this stuff. And you're not going to say that.
Yeah, no.
Where you start is to say, I've been your friend for a long time, and I know you really love me, but there are things that I don't tell you about me.
Hmm.
That's where you start. That is a start. And they'll go,
Mhm.
well, what is it? I'm not ready to tell you that yet. This was my beginning. Just telling you, it is not you, it is me. I just struggle to say things that are more vulnerable or more transparent. That's where you start. That's where you can start. There are many places you can start, but you start very simply. And perfectionists, of course, want to go, well, no, that's not hard enough. Well, that seems simple. Seeming simple is not. It's not simple. And so, um, somebody will come in my office and say, well, this is really silly, but, and I'll go, wait, just wait right there. If this is a step toward you going in any direction that you feel like is healing, there's nothing silly or inconsequential about it. Nothing. And they'll kind of look at me and I go, so what was it? And sure enough, they'll say to me, well, I used to call my mother 4 times a day and I only call her 2. Good. you know, Great. Or whatever it is that they're wanting to change.
Wow, it's amazing. Um, another question I had for you, just given my own experiences, what do you feel is the role of anger in perfectly hidden depression, would you say that a lot of people who suffer from it feel averse to feeling or expressing
Yes.
anger, which leads to this excessive amount of shame and a lot of suppressed emotions that end up building up so much inside that then the person just can't deal with it anymore?
Really good question. I don't know if anybody's ever asked it. I think probably for a lot of the people that at least I had in mind when I wrote the book, they more than likely grew up in homes where anger was not allowed. Because if they'd been able to be angry, they would have said, well, what, the fact that dad drinks himself to sleep every night makes me mad, or
Mhm.
he never comes to my games, or mom, you never, you know, you're too busy on your phone. I mean, it's like I feel neglect. I mean, whatever it is, that's not an emotion they feel safe enough in that family or that culture and environment. Again, it's not
Mhm.
always a familial thing, um, to express, and uh, nor probably is fear, but they're probably more aware of fear. So anger is something typically, again, with these folks. Now, I have had some people tell me that in the work environment that they feel like sometimes they can be overly aggressive.
Mm,
Um, and so because their need for things to go perfectly,
perfect. Yeah.
and then when they begin to heal, that anger with others begins to subside because their own standards begin to not necessarily lessen, but soften.
Mhm.
And they realize that, you get more. What is it? You get more. What's that old phrase? You get more something with honey than you do. I've forgotten, whatever. Um, but uh, one man, for example, told me that, I mean, he was very much a identified with perfectly hidden depression, and he'd been married 3 times. And he said, none of my wives knew me. Absolutely none of them knew me. I didn't let them know me. I needed to be in control.
Mhm.
My children don't know me. And he said, I've got to do something because, and so he really worked hard, and he went back to his, and people were asking to get off his team at work because he was so difficult to work with.
Oh, wow.
And he asked his supervisor to retrain him, which happened. And I'll never forget, he called me and he said, Margaret, I was so afraid when I was working with you in your office that if
Mm.
I became less perfectionistic, that my job would suffer.
Mhm.
What I found is that people are asking to be on my team now.
Oh, that's
And
amazing.
so, yes, I mean, I'm not trying to make this into a Disney tale. I mean, these are actual stories of what people have said because, he began to try to get to know the people that worked for him, worked with
Mhm.
him, and that led to a better work environment. And then he wasn't, writing people so hard and writing himself so hard. So it can change someone. And but as you are pointing out, and I think it's very apt to point out, this isn't a 1 month fix. This may be transformative in many ways, which is a word that I think is used a little too much right now, but um, it takes time.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I feel like I definitely had this, and I definitely was not encouraged to feel or express anger ever. And I actually was really afraid of anger. And I feel like I've had a challenging relationship with anger because seeing my dad not be able to control his anger and
Mhm,
being on the receiving end of that as the most vulnerable person in the family, and incidentally, the smallest person in the family, I really developed such a aversion to anger,
mhm,
that
mhm,
I wouldn't even admit that I felt it ever because
mhm,
I thought I'm not supposed to. I'm taught that I'm not supposed to. In the Indian culture, a woman is not supposed to have these feelings. And
mhm,
even just as a woman, I feel like we're all about nurturing, right? And we're about caring, and we have to do that whole prescribed role. But then we get taken advantage of so much, right? That anger would be the appropriate response. Anger would be the
Mhm.
thing to kind of burst through like those layers of shame that cause you to be inactive, right? That depression is like unlived life, right? It's like you are just under this heavy spell of something that doesn't allow you to move forward. And so
Right.
I feel like for me that was really huge on my journey to give myself the permission to feel that for
Mhm.
once. And I think that's why my skin did its whole thing because it's like, look, we're red, we're angry, we're gonna just show you that we do have this emotion and we do have to deal with it because if you don't deal with it, we're just gonna keep coming back, you know? Like, and they were red and they were angry and they were in my skin and it would be hot and I had to do a lot to deal with it. But what I realized so much right away was that I know what you are. You're my suppressed anger that is
Mhm.
coming out after years of trying to run, but not really being able to hide from what's going on inside. And for me, I found a lot of relief actually in exercise and not the crazy kind of exercise I used to do when I had eating disorders as a teenager, where it was a self punishment kind of strategy, but really like owning my physical power and being able to channel that anger into martial arts practices was
Right.
really empowering for me. And it's really interesting because in the Eastern tradition, we have a system of astrology, which is different than the Western system. The Western is based on the Eastern system, it's the oldest system, but it's fascinating to kind of like see your chart and to see the influences of different elements and different planets on your mind, your body, your relationships, your work, and things like that. And I always thought I'm totally a good person. I'm compassionate. I am a kind-hearted person. I am never
Certainly never angry.
definitely never angry, like, I'm just, like, a feminine energy, right? Like, I write about goddesses, I wear pink. Anger doesn't have any place in all of that. So sure enough, the chart itself was a huge revelation because in the chart, it kind of, like, shows you a blueprint of your personality and your overall sort of purpose or what sort of role you play in society. And sure enough, the second strongest planet after the planet of wisdom and spiritual teachings, which makes sense because I'm so very much drawn to that, is Mars, which is the planet of,
Ah,
you know,
fiery red.
action and adventure and anger and potentially violence. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like according to my chart, I'm like double Mars because I have a Aries moon and an Aries rising sign, which is like the leader, the fire, the warrior, right? And it says that my role is to be a warrior, that I'm not just here to spread wisdom, but the way that I even spread wisdom is by being a warrior for truth and a warrior for peace and a peaceful warrior. But that warrior part, I didn't even know I had within me until I uncovered it through leaving that situation of the crazy teachers and really owning my power. And it's so interesting because, they were still my teachers, and I will never not call them that because I learned so much about myself and about how to apply these teachings in dark situations from what I went through with them. But I remember that one thing one of them said that really stuck with me is that the way I would get moksha or spiritual liberation is not by continuing to develop qualities that I already had, like the humility, like the gratitude, like the selfless service, like the ability to feel compassion and empathy towards other beings, but actually by owning my power. And that
Mhm.
by not
Interesting.
owning my power was the thing that was actually blocking me from being liberated. And I was like, whoa, okay, I really need to do that, and I really need to put that anger with the wisdom and create true soul power from that. And that was an
Mhm.
equation I learned from studying that also stuck with me that when we bring anger together with wisdom, we can be a force for powerful transformation within ourselves and then be an example for other people. And so for me, it's like a whole new relationship with this fire element and this ability to burn through what doesn't serve me or other people, and to be able to find that courage also
Mhm.
that I think it takes to even get onto a path of healing and a path that can lead to growth. So I personally have felt a huge change in my life from just giving myself permission to accept that I have this, and then to really channel that constructively, to be able to get out of my own comfort zone, to be able to take risks, to be able to be vulnerable, and to get myself out of this whole pattern, right, of pretending that everything is perfect even though it wasn't inside. So I
Mm.
wonder, like, what other some other healthy ways you might recommend other people who might relate to what I'm saying to safely connect with that anger without hurting themselves or anyone else in the process. Because obviously suicide, I feel like that must be anger that they're directing into themselves, right? To hurt themselves in such a way.
Oh, well,
Could be part of it.
yeah, it could be. It could be. And there are, actually some of the suicides that are most associated with anger that I know about are the more impulsive suicides where
Oh,
they're angry, and then they express that anger through dying. But you know what I kept thinking as you were talking, that if I were trying to talk about this, it would be that we pigeonhole ourselves into thinking, well, I am X,
yeah.
must be X. I must be selfless. I want to be, I aspire to be giving. I aspire to be, whatever it is, caring. But rather than it being an or, I'm either that or I'm this, it's that and I'm angry or I have angry feelings. I am caring and compassionate and I can be angry. That those things do not obstruct one another. They can coexist actually very beautifully.
Mhm.
Um, if you're only angry, then yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah.
If everything makes you angry, if that's your sole way of expressing emotion, then that can be a problematic, kind of a characterological problem.
Mhm.
But if you are, you know, if you're funny and you can be angry, if you're caring and you can be angry, if you're caring and you can be funny. I mean, it's just sort of this. We are complicated human beings, and we don't have to pigeonhole ourselves. This happens a lot in families, at least in the United States. I know it does. That people will tell me all the time, "Oh, I was the smart kid in the family. My
Yeah.
brother was the funny kid. My
Yeah.
sister was the spoiled kid, or my sister was the whiny kid." And unfortunately, you get called that enough,
Yeah.
and you start going, "Okay, that's who I am. That's all who I am. I'm just funny. I'm smart. I'm a good athlete. That's where I need to head. That's where I'm going to get my needs met." But actually we're all ands. So, that's what came to mind when I was listening to you talk.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it's accepting that room for paradox and that room
Mhm.
for
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
nuances and the complexities of life, and
Right.
not pigeonholing ourselves. Because in a way, I feel like the perfectly hidden depression is a pigeonholing
It
in
is.
a role, and we have to get ourselves out of that. So, would you please share about the 5 stages of healing from perfectly hidden depression, and also how someone who's listening might take their first brave step on this journey? Because that's the
Of
hardest
course.
one, I think.
I have to tell you the funny story about the stages of healing first.
Okay.
Um, I submitted the book to my publisher, and they said, "Okay, we really like the book, but the book didn't have any treatment strategies. It was just describing this syndrome."
Uh-huh.
I thought that was good enough. Thank you very much. And they said, no, we need a treatment strategy and we need it in 2 weeks. I
Wow.
was like, whoa, okay. And so I really sat down. By that time, I'd been a therapist for 24, 25 years. And I thought, what do I do with people? If there was a compartmentalization, or if there was, stages of what I do with people, I don't care if they have bipolar disorder. I don't care if they have depression. I
Mhm,
don't care if they have borderline personality disorder. I don't care if they have anxiety, an eating disorder. What do I do in
mhm,
my own, if I had to segment it, which I don't typically do,
mhm,
but if I had to segment it so it made sense to somebody who was trying to learn it, how would I do that? And they wanted it marketable as well. So it was the 5 C's of treatment, which
oh, okay.
I hate that, but that was, they said, make it marketable. I was like, oh gosh. So anyway, so I thought, the first root that I think is important is consciousness, especially, well, really with anything. You have to accept that something is a problem before
Mhm,
you are willing to say, or it's destructive, or it's a part of you that is getting in your way. You
mhm.
have to accept that first and see it as a problem, or you're going to kind of look at someone and go, well, that's not a problem. So I get angry. That's not a problem. So I um, can't leave my home. That's not a problem. So I think that that kind of consciousness awareness, and again with mindfulness, I wrote some about that in the book, um, and um, that sense of paying attention to um, what's happening around you, not to analyze it, but to just see it and be aware of it. That's not a very good definition, but anyway. Um, and so that's where you have to start. The second one is commitment. Therapy is just like any kind of healing journey, takes some commitment. It takes some, and you actually, that commitment can be challenged in many, many ways. It can be challenged in financial ways. It can be challenged in pragmatic ways. It can be challenged in time ways. It can be challenged in, but often it's often challenged by, this is just hard.
Mhm,
And it scares me to do this. You have to face your fear. You have to, sometimes your family doesn't want you to change. Um, they say, I kind of like you the way you are. What do you mean you're not going to do X, Y, or Z anymore?
mhm,
Um, what do you mean you're going to therapy? So it can be, you can get pushback, you can struggle yourself, and that kind of commitment is important. The third one is what we were talking about a few minutes ago, which was the confrontation part, looking at your rules, both spoken and unspoken, and how you're following them now. And is that a good thing? I mean, are you following rules that you're glad you follow now?
mhm,
What would happen if you stopped following that rule? And what are you scared would happen if you did?
mhm.
And then, if you begin risking that, what does it feel like to not live by that rule anymore? What did it feel like to say, it's okay that I don't eat all this food? you know and so that's the third step. The fourth step, in some ways, is, it's not the hardest, but if you have trauma in your lifetime, which many of these folks do,
Mhm,
you may not be able to do this by yourself. You may need to go into a therapist to do this, because it's very difficult work. And I use what's called a trauma timeline with people.
mhm,
That's a very specific technique about going back and recognizing in your childhood what were the things that happened to you that affected you in a painful way, what were the things that happened to you in a productive way,
mhm,
and beginning to then, either through your art, through music, through writing, through journaling, through talking, through just looking at it, you can begin to see the patterns that existed in your life, and how maybe things that you had not even been aware of were traumatic, actually were, because you begin to say, if that hadn't happened when I was 3, I probably wouldn't have chosen that when I was 23.
Mhm.
Um, but that can be very difficult for people. People will say, "Oh, I'm just going back and blaming my parents, or I'm going back and," no, you're not doing any of that. You're becoming aware and you're acknowledging. There's a huge difference between blame and acknowledgement.
Mhm.
Fifth change is something, or fifth segment or stage is something I think is very important. And a lot of therapists, I don't know. Some therapists do not stress this, but I do. I think you get hope not from insight. Insight's wonderful. Lots of aha moments. That's great. But where you get hope is when you see your behavior change. And
Mhm.
so I take each one of those 10 traits of perfect in the book, in 10 traits of perfectly hidden depression, and I have you pick the easiest one
Mhm.
to begin to say, well, what if I didn't do X anymore? What if I challenged number 7?
Mhm.
And what would that look like operationally in my life? What would it look like to, let's say, this is a true story. I think it's in the book, of a woman who said, "I'm going to choose number 2," because she was busy, busy, busy all the time because she constantly took the responsibility for getting things done.
Mhm.
And she went to a committee meeting and she did not volunteer for one single thing to do.
Mhm.
She said she literally sat on her hands. I think, do you remember the story in the book?
Yeah, I remember that story.
And then she came into therapy and she said, I almost went back in because who was I to not, everybody in that room was busy, and who was I to not take a role? And she said, I had to fight back tears because I just felt like I was disappointing in everybody. And as we talked about it, what we realized is that she had learned that she had been adopted as a child. Again, here we're going back sort of to the trauma timeline. She'd
Mhm.
been adopted as a child, and her parents, adopted parents, had unfortunately told her all the time, "You wouldn't be who you are if you hadn't been adopted by us."
Mm.
And so she had internalized that and thought, I have to prove my worth. And she proved her worth through constantly volunteering.
Mhm.
And I remember her face in my office, and she said, I don't know how to feel okay about myself if I'm not accomplishing something and if I'm not working harder than everybody else. And yet she could see the roots of those feelings in what her adoptive parents had told her. Again, hopefully not hurtfully or on purpose, but it had been hurtful. So you go back and you try to change some of these things. And that's what you really can get this sense of almost giddy freedom from that, um, like throwing the food in the, in the uh,
In the compost bin.
compost. Yeah, compost. And so those little changes in your behavior, no matter how inconsequential seeming, are not inconsequential. And you can feel your life beginning to, like, take a little deeper breath than you could have before. And again, you do this over and over and over. All these stages are interwoven and interact, and you change your belief, and then all of a sudden you see something from your past differently, and then you deepen your commitment, or your commitment gets shaky, and all of them interact. So it's consciousness, commitment, confrontation, uh, connection, and change.
Wow. I know it's a marketing thing to have
Yeah,
those
I
5
hate that.
Cs, but it actually does help to remember to have the alliteration because it's like,
Yeah.
oh, like, and then you can kind of connect with each of these steps more efficiently, than
There's a
if
reason why people do it.
yeah, yeah, exactly, than if it were explained a different way, so
Yeah.
yeah, I appreciate that. Um, I think a lot of times there's a fear of floodgates of emotions pouring out when they have been suppressed for so long. I certainly went through that. And I
Yeah.
think it's easy to wonder if we allow ourselves to finally feel if the emotions will ever stop. So, how do you recommend confronting this to be able to start the process of feeling to heal?
It's a normal fear, and it's one that um I often talk to my clients about. I have a young girl right now who's a new patient,
Mhm.
and she has never looked at some of these things. And my suggestion to her was, well, leave it here. And then when you walk back in the office, it will be here waiting for you. So there are some mental tricks, there's some emotional tricks that you can use,
Okay.
tricks. But I will say this, some people will say to me, well, if I started crying, I'd never stop.
Mhm.
I've never seen somebody not be able to stop crying.
Mhm.
Um, you know, and if they can't stop crying, then I will see them again and find out what's going on. I mean, is your grief, are you realizing something that you've never realized before? And let's talk about it. And then I need to teach them some calming techniques.
Mhm.
So I understand the fear. But one of the analogies I've used as well, and maybe this is not the way many other people clean out their closets, but when I clean out a closet, I pull everything out
Mhm.
and then start putting stuff back in.
Uh-huh.
When I pull everything out, I usually look down and think, oh my God, I'll never get all this stuff back in the closet. Well,
Yeah.
I don't want to put all that stuff back in the closet. If it was, so I recommend that people both gear what they feel personally ready for. Um, and they tell me, again, I'm a therapist. So I say, I'm not in charge of what we talk about. You're in charge of what we talk about. If you're not ready to tell me about something, if
Mhm.
I ask you a question, then look at me and say, I'm not ready to talk about that. Okay, fine.
Mhm.
So you have to monitor yourself, but at the same time, suppressing it, stuffing it, whatever word we want to use, has not worked.
Mhm.
And it's coming out, it's seeping out underneath the door and through the, like those movies you see where there's, vapor coming out from some hidden, storage
Yeah.
place. And you don't want it to burst out. So if you let some of the pressure off by
Mhm.
beginning to talk about it a little bit, then you'll probably be more in control of it. But I understand the fear. I remember telling a therapist of mine years ago, when am I ever not going to be angry? And he said, yeah, yeah, you'll be angry for a while here because you've never been angry before.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly, and I feel like I went through that with my skin for sure.
Yeah. He said, yeah, well, just, okay, you're angry.
It's a new
Don't,
thing, right? It's like,
yeah.
yeah, if you've never allowed yourself something, you gotta really be patient with it and let
Mhm.
it
Seemed
take.
like a long time to me, but probably wasn't all that long. I just was uncomfortable with it.
Yeah. Yeah, same here. Same here. It takes a while to integrate, like, oh, okay,
Hmm.
I can feel this and I can deal with it and channel it into different ways, but be aware that it's there and not try to deny it.
I want to tell you, these are really wonderful questions. You've given so much thought to these questions, and I so appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. I loved your book. It was so
Thank
insightful
you.
and amazing to read about. So, and I have more questions for you. And if we don't have time to do all of them, let's definitely do an interview with you on the blog and we can address
Right.
the rest of them that way so that we can do justice to everything that to share. But I feel like, we've uncovered so many amazing things, and I definitely would love to have you address one of the biggest obstacles that I feel a lot of people face in making big changes in our lives is how those currently in our lives will react to that. So, would you please also address this fear of what others would think or say if we start to be more vulnerable and real with them after years of hiding?
I had half a chapter to talk about this in the book. I could have written a whole book about this. I mentioned this before, but I will say, well, I didn't really mention this before, but it can be very difficult.
Yeah.
Um,
I think it's one of the most difficult things. I feel
It
like it's
is.
one of the first resistances, but I'm married, what will my children do? And even for making Ayurveda lifestyle changes or diet changes, those are the first kind of resistances that people have to making change, is how will the rest of the people in my life fare with that? And even the guy in the job, right? Like, will I lose my job?
Right. Will I lose my job? Exactly.
Sick.
So, um, everyone in your family is going to have a different response. I think that uh, well, let me say this first. People in this particular category who have identified with perfectly hidden depression may have, I don't have an exhaustive list, obviously. They may have been, they may be partnered with somebody that literally for the last 12 years that they've been together have said, you know what, I don't know you any better than I knew you when the day we started living together, or we got married, whatever. And I really want to know you. So where are you? I mean, they
Mhm.
may be, they may divorce because of that. They may say, I'm still here trying to get to know you.
Mhm.
And they might write to me and go, I think my wife is this person. And, what can I do? How can I reach her? And that has happened. It's also likely, however, that you've either attracted someone who also is a hider, also wants to avoid painful emotion, and y'all just don't do that. The
Yeah.
two of you don't get angry. The two of you kind of, you look like you have the perfect life. People tell you, we want to be just like you. Um, and so that may be part of the problem, because he or she or they isn't ready to make that change with you, and they don't like it that now all of a sudden you want to talk about things or express things that, or you want to introduce something into the partnership that has not been there in the past.
Mhm.
So that can be a hurdle. The second thing is that you may have been attracted to someone who really needed you to be overly responsible, especially someone with narcissism,
Mhm.
because you're the first one to say, "Oh, this was my fault," or
Right.
I should have worked harder, or I should have understood this better," or you're accustomed to taking a lot of responsibility to the point where it may be something even pathological in you, or certainly destructive in you. And the narcissist is going to say, "Yeah, this is your fault." Um, and or someone who has those kinds of traits. So you may have attracted someone like that. They also are not going to welcome a change. The third thing is that you may have attracted someone who's under responsible because you're overly responsible, or
Mhm.
they are they, you know, they're underachieving and you're overachieving.
Mhm.
You're the primary breadwinner, or and all of a sudden you decide, I'm not going to work three jobs anymore, or I'm going to take something that's for a pay cut because I'm tired of working this many hours, and
Mhm.
they're going to freak out. So, I that is tough.
Yeah.
It's definitely tough. And uh it, you know, if you're lucky enough to be partnered with the first kind of person, they're going to be delighted. Although you're probably going to be the one that says, "Oh my gosh, you really want me to talk to you about me being angry with you? Yes, I do." You know, the other three kinds are problematic. And just like when we make, like, if an alcoholic gets sober, um, if someone who, any kind of major change, as you say, developing an Ayurveda lifestyle, or even going vegan or something. I mean, we change something that alters our social way of being with one another, or our familial structure. Then all of a sudden that can cause problems. So I'm not going to try to give a glib answer here.
Yeah.
it is definitely one of the tougher things. I think I learned this years ago. And I was a music therapist, or I actually studied music therapy. And one of the things we had to do was we had to shadow an ancillary therapy, and I shadowed a physical therapist in the summer. And this woman came in. I'll never forget. Her name was Harriet.
Mhm.
Harriet was so out of shape. It was a spinal pain clinic, and her back hurt, and we managed to get her on the bike, and she could barely pedal like 2 or 3 cycles.
Mhm.
By the time Harriet left that clinic, she was coming around with a towel around her neck, and she was like, all right, I'm ready to work out, and it was this huge, phenomenal change in her.
Uh-huh.
Well, then she went home. And I saw Harriet about 6 weeks later at the very end of my tenure at that job, and she was back in a wheelchair. And I said, what has happened? She said, we see this all the time. They go
Mm.
back to their family. Their family wants them to still get disability, or their family says, no, you can't do that. And
Wow.
because of the pressure of the family dynamics, they'll go back to the way they were before. So it's really tough.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, it's very brave, I think, to make this journey because you
Mm-hmm.
do take these risks where it's a lot safer, maybe feeling to stay where you are. And yet, the risk of not changing means staying inauthentic with yourself and means staying stuck. And so there's kind of a
Well,
high price for
and,
it, but
and
it's a big
again, not
risk.
not to be overly dramatic, but I'm not being overly dramatic when I say sometimes the price of this rigid, a perfectionistic stance, and then you feel you're more despairing, you're more lonely, you get overwhelmed by something. The the correlates of perfectionism and suicide are going up, and they're both so this can lead to a suicidal gesture or actually suicide, and that's terrible.
Yeah.
So, and tragic.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And speaking of which, I really loved the story you shared about the maze of life. Would you please share that with our listeners?
You talking about the maze that I went through?
Yes.
Yeah. Um, Sometimes I cry when I tell this story, so I'll see if I tear up this time. I had been at a
It's a good example of being very authentic and vulnerable if it does.
yeah.
So.
I had gone to a residential psychiatric program. They wanted me and several other therapists to go through their program as if we were a client and to experience what they taught. They were very experiential. I did a sweat lodge and I did several other things that were really cool.
Mhm.
The first night we were there, and I was so tired and I just wanted to go back to my hotel room. They blindfolded us and said, we're going to lead you into this maze. And there are several rules. One of the rules is you hang onto the rope and you can't let go of the rope. And you need to find the exit to the maze. And all you have to do is find the exit. And if you need help, let us know. Raise your hand or something like that. I said, okay. So there were about 30 of us.
Mhm.
And I was anxious and my ego got all involved, and I was trying to track in my own mind, okay, I went to the right and then I went to the left and then I went backwards, and and the pressure was growing and the soft music was playing, and then they would clap when somebody got out of the found the exit,
Mhm.
and and I was getting more and more nervous, feeling like I'm going to be the stupid looking person with my hand on the rope still walking around. So I raised my hand and I said something like, okay. And so the person came over and I said, so I need to just go under the rope. He said, no, you can't go under the rope. That's not the answer. And so I said, okay, that's not the exit. But I was getting more and more frustrated, thinking, I'm a smart person. I should be able to find this exit. So I raised my hand again and I said, okay, is it breaking the rules? Is the exit breaking the rules? No, Margaret, that's not the exit. And so I kept going. And Ananta, I just remember I stopped in my tracks and I raised my hand for the third time. And I said, I need help. And they said, that's the exit. And I will tell you that I changed at that moment. Um, all my, well, I hope most of my defensiveness or guard dropped. And I realized that I could only get everything out of that weekend if I kept my guard down.
Mm.
That I wouldn't be Dr. Margaret Rutherford from Fayetteville, Arkansas. Um, and that I just needed to be myself. And I don't ask for help easily, never have. And I hope I've gotten better since that experience. Um, so it was very, very um, meaningful for me to include that story in the book.
Wow, that's such a perfect place to close this part of our session, I feel, because it's really you living what you're teaching and writing about and leading other people with in the book. So that's such a powerful example of what we need to do. And that's the hardest thing to do. It's the simplest thing to do. It may seem like it's easier for other people to do, but once we do it, it's really life changing.
It is. It is.
That's beautiful. Well, thank you so, so much for being
Welcome.
so vulnerable and authentic and sharing this message of perfectly hidden depression and how to take the brave journey to start to take off these masks. And where can people find out more about you and about your book and your podcast?
It's drmargaretrutherford.com. The podcast is on there, the Self Work Podcast, which I've done for now 8 years and love doing it. The book is there. You can get the book anywhere. It's in ebook form, audiobook form, and then paperback. And my TEDx talk is on TEDx, or you can put in TEDx. Actually, you can find it on my website too. You can subscribe to my website and you'll get a newsletter once a week, only once a week, that just has my blog posts and my podcast on it. And sometimes some fun things and pictures and challenges and whatever happens to come into my head. Um, and so that's me.
Amazing. Thank you so, so much for being with us. I know our listeners are really, really going to benefit from your sharing. And I'm so excited to talk to you more about how we can collaborate to be able to join forces and helping more people.
I think that's just an outstanding idea.
Yay. Thank you so much again.
Okay, thank you.
We will go ahead and stop.